I think we ought to talk about the Pac-12 because the conversation has been for the last, 5 years really. Is the Pac-12 ever going to be back? Is it going to be what people remember it to be during the Pete Carroll years when USC was running roughshod over people, when Rick Neuheisel's squads were awesome, right? When we could really look at UCLA and start to depend on them winning 10 games a year. And the way that I go at this, right? Because I spend a lot of time thinking about what I want to say and how I want to say it, because that's the job, is think about how I talk about it with my friends. So I'm in a group chat with a Washington fan, an Oregon fan, and a Georgia fan. Now, the Washington fan remembers that they're the last team from the Pac-12 to make the college football playoff, right? 5 years ago. The Oregon fan remembers that they're the last Pac-12 squad to actually play in a national title game, right? But the Georgia fan, he knows that 11 out of 15 national champions last 15 years come from his conference. And that's really what it has been about when we talk about this amongst ourselves, right? We talk about what is the strongest conference and we rank them, right? SEC being at the top. And depending on how you feel about the Big 12, ACC, or Pac-12, you got them in some descending order, with the Big 10 probably sitting at number 2 because of what Ohio State has been able to do. And while people would tell you over and over again, the Big 10 is a one-team league, so is the Big 12. Which one has produced a national champion in the last 15 years, right? You're talking about Ohio State and the Big 10. But the other way we go at this is, how do you recruit and how do you develop and how many championships you win? So when we take a look at the development part of it, right? I start with NFL draft picks. So from 2011 to 2020, the SEC has produced 529 NFL draft picks, 103 in the first round. This year produced 66, right? And Alabama had 10 players selected. The ACC has produced 360. The Big 10 has produced 359. The Pac-12 has produced 323. And the Big 12 has produced 226. Now, the Big 12 has been a 10-team league for some time now, so the numbers are going to be a little off there. But when we talk about first rounders, you're talking about the Pac-12 putting out 44 and the Big 10 putting out 45, ACC putting out 50, and the Big 12 putting out 33. So we know what the SEC is, and we know that it's in a class unto itself. But when you look at the development part of it, the Pac-12 has been right there when you talk about what the NFL values. And the NFL does not have a team in college football, right? It wants the best players possible. If it goes to get those dudes from an FCS squad, like North Dakota State, we've seen Carson Wentz, Trey Lance here in recent years, that's what they're going to do. And that's a good way, I think, to judge development, because they're nonpartisan on this issue. They don't really care. They just want to take the top 2% of players as they see it. The other way that I think we take a look at this is, how much do you value your coaches? Now, having a conversation about coaches' salaries is something else entirely, but you can also take a look at which ones are willing to pay their guys at the top of the list. SEC obviously leading here. The average salary of a head coach, right, at the SEC level is $5.6 million. The Big 10, $4.6 million. Big 12, $4.1 million. ACC, $3.8 million. And the Pac-12, $3.5 million. So they're producing first rounders nearly on par with the Big 10, but they're separated by about $600,000 on average when you're talking about salaries. Maybe you raise the level of salary, you get a better result. Maybe, right? But that's only one part of it. The other part of it that I think is also big is recruiting. We know Texas, Florida, Georgia, and California put out the best and most blue chip prospects in the nation year in and year out. Cal, USC, UCLA, they don't really have an excuse for me here. You should get the dudes that you want, to say nothing of an Arizona or Arizona State, because I think that the state of Arizona has also been putting out some hitters here of late. But when you take a look at some of the guys that have come out of these states that are Pac-12 states, Arizona, Washington, California, and you look at where they've gone in recent years, your head scratching. Emeka Egbuka is the number 1 wide receiver in 2021 out of Washington, going to Ohio State. Okay, Spencer Rattler, best quarterback in the 2019 class out of Arizona, goes to Oklahoma. Bijan Robinson, a 5-star tailback in the 2020 class, he goes to Texas. DJ Uiagalelei played at St. John Bosco in California. He's at Clemson. Bryce Young coming out of Modern Day. He's at Alabama. JT Daniels coming out of Modern Day. He's at Georgia. That can't be so. If you're USC in particular, but UCLA, Cal, Washington, Oregon, you got to go down and keep your kids in your region. And then you develop those prospects into the kind of players that you've shown you can do, right? So when you take a look at those things, it's really, can you compete with the SEC, with Clemson, because it ain't really the ACC, it's Clemson, Oklahoma and Texas to keep your kids? Like, this is a rare year in which you've got dudes coming out of the state of Washington, and only really one of them picked Washington, Sam Heward, right? We'll see about JT Tuimoloau, right? Who's still going to take his visits. But there are signs to show you that Ohio State is a really good spot for him. Now, it's not to say that Washington isn't, but it would be a tremendous boon for the conference if Jimmy Lake and Washington could pull off that win and keep what we think as the best non-quarterback, perhaps the last 2 years, depending on how you feel about Brian Brzee, staying at Washington. All right. Now, the other part about this that I think is lost on a lot of people is that college football is cyclical. It wasn't that long ago that the Pac-12 was running roughshod over everybody winning national championships. Just ask 2004 Oklahoma. Okay. And it wasn't that long ago that Rick Neuheisel had us scared to death of playing Washington in a non-conference game at Oklahoma. Wasn't that long ago that the SEC was a joke in my lifetime. I do think these things are going to come back around, and they tend to. You've got Oregon on its come up. We've got USC, who showed out in a pandemic season, right? Arizona State, I think, is a dark horse to make the playoff, depending on how they get through the first part of their schedule. Like, Utah has reloaded. You're going to see some good football here, but you also can't take these high-profile defeats in non-conference scheduling. You can't have Auburn beat up on Washington and Oregon in back-to-back years like they had in 2018, 2019. You can't have Oregon show up to Columbus this year and lay an egg against an Ohio State team that is really a quarterback away from, I think, playing in the college football playoff. You got to have UCLA show up against LSU later this year when they play in a non-conference game, right? You've got to see Colorado show up and give Texas A&M a game, if not beat them, in their non-conference game, and then we'll see the tide turn. You see those things start to take shape. You'll see the recruiting start to pick up. They'll produce more draft picks than the Big Ten, than the ACC, than the Big 12. And then you can start having a conversation about not just making the playoff, but competing for national championships. Because when you start to see those Pac-12 schools compete for national championships, then we're not going to have this conversation anymore, right? It's going to be, so that's what the Pac-12 is up to now. And this is going to be really interesting as we figure out who the new Pac-12 commissioner is going to be when the television deals do something different. But my goodness, if there's a bear that is still sleeping, it's over there in the Pacific, all right? It's going to be it's not going to be that long, though, because just taking a look at what it has been in the past, remember when it was Texas, Oklahoma, 05 to basically 2010, and neither one of those teams have made a national championship game since, right? Remember when it was Marcus Mariota and Oregon, 2014. It'll be there again. But you're going to have to start by keeping your kids in your region and then continuing to develop them. So we'll see, because recruiting is about to pick up in a hurry. I expect to see a ton of decommitments, and I expect to see a ton of commitments. Stat that I'll leave you with. Last year, this time, we saw 130 dudes among the top 300 players in the country committed to a university. This year, that number is down to 27, which is to say, A, we're not really interested in taking your commits right now. And B, we are going to see people have a run on in June, July, August, all the way up through. This is the time for the Pac-12 to try to make up a gap in its recruiting.